Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at my pink Oncidium Twinkle and the problem that it had and what I did to help course correct, and a quick update on how it's doing, including its current spikes. But before we get into the details of what happened, here are a couple photos of its last bloom cycle, and it was around the same time this year, basically winter time, that it bloomed. I can't remember exactly how many spikes, it's the one in the back, how many spikes the pink one had last year, but I remember it being pretty fragrant, and I was able to smell its fragrance from quite a few feet away when it was in bloom. And so it was during mid-October 2018, during my regular checkup and regular watering routine for my orchid, that I discovered that there was a snail at the bottom of it. And at the time, this orchid was potted in semi-hydro. And as you can see here, there was this tiny little snail at the bottom, which explained why this orchid was not doing well, and the base of the orchid looked kind of gross. I couldn't understand why, because I thought I was not rinsing enough, but now we know what the culprit is. And it's kind of puzzling to me because I've had this orchid for more than a year, and last year I had no problem, so I really don't understand or cannot figure out where the little tiny snail came from. So the first thing I did was I took it out of the pot, I cleaned off the roots area, the base area, and I sprayed it with 70% alcohol and 3% hydrogen peroxide, and then I also let it dry for about half a day or so, and then I also put it in systemic insecticides and pesticide that I have at home. This orchid was producing, I think, maybe 5 to 7 spikes, and as you can see here, all those spikes were dried up. They just shrunk and wrinkled and dried, didn't develop further. And so this is just on top of a napkin, some of the debris or dirty stuff that I could clean off of the orchid. And I actually, during the process, I found a second snail. And I found the second snail, the one that's, that was poking its head out. That's the second one. After I had already sprayed alcohol and hydrogen peroxide. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is, if you have snails on your orchid, you want to make sure you do a good job removing them. You don't necessarily have to kill them, but remove them. Maybe, put them back in the wild, on the grass, on trees, whatever you do, right? But if you don't remove them, just by spraying alcohol and hydrogen peroxide may not do the trick, because they could be simply, sneak back into their shells, and, because I sprayed alcohol and hydrogen peroxide, right? And this second snail was still alive after I found it. I didn't find it at first, right? So you want to make sure you actually remove snails. You do the best you can and find all the snails that you possibly can, and hopefully you've catch all of them. That's the point I'm trying to make. And another thing I want to share is I used to use 50% alcohol, and that's because it's the easiest alcohol concentration that I can find in my area. I was able to get a hold of a couple bottles of 70% alcohol because an orchid hobbyist from China actually told me 70% is the hospital grade alcohol, and it's actually more efficient or effective in disinfecting and killing germs, whatnot. But then the efficacy or effectiveness actually decreases once the concentration goes more than 70%. So if you can find 70% solution, great. If not, 50% probably will work just as well because I've been using that for years until recently. So again, this orchid was potted in semi-hydro setup, and now it's just bare root in an 8-ounce cup because I wanted to allow roots to breathe, but also an easy way for me to soak this orchid in some pesticide, systemic pesticide or insecticide solution. And let's fast forward. It's December 4th. So within 6 weeks time, a month and a half, this orchid pushed out quite a few small growth that I don't think were mature, but they were shooting out spikes from those tiny growths. So I think that this orchid just knew that it's that time of the year that it's supposed to bloom. And after I cleaned up the root system, it decided that it was still going to bloom, which was a very nice surprise because I thought to myself that this orchid is probably going to skip its blooming for this year, but obviously it is still producing spikes. Quite a few of them too. And coming up is just a short video clip I took of this orchid probably around the same time, around mid-December, early to mid-December, and you can see here that there were quite a few spikes at the time already. And I haven't counted it because it was just sort of in a corner and I wasn't trying to pay too much attention to it because I thought this orchid just was not going to bloom. But I think in a couple weeks, once the buds are bigger, I will definitely take some photos and possibly make a video and share with you its development. And hopefully in a couple weeks too, it'll start to bloom. So, because I really think it's that time of the year. And I think I've shared this in another video, maybe it might have been this time last year. This orchid is actually also called Christmas Oncidium in Taiwan because it always blooms around Christmas time. So it has a very interesting name, at least to me anyway. People call it Christmas Oncidium because the time of the year that it would bloom typically. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned what you can from this video. It's still a mystery how these snails happen a year after, more than a year after I have had this orchid. And I grow my orchids indoors on a 3rd floor, and I just don't know whether it's possible for small snails to grow from maybe eggs to a real snail, and incubate for that long until it becomes a problem. I really don't know, but it happened, and I took drastic measure, unpotted the orchid, and even gave it some systemic insecticides, which I don't like to use, but I think it did the trick, and now the orchid is rewarding me with more spikes. Hopefully the bloom will be just as good this year, but if not, at least it's spiking. It's going to bloom somewhat, and it's better than I thought. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!